All right. The Graduate.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
That's a slogan. We should put that on the t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy,
Roger, how are you going?
good. Hey man, have you ever you opened your phone and seen one of those YouTube or Instagram reels about the women getting the ick from certain things?
So I've seen this. It's like a recent phenomenon, right? So it's this thing where, you know, women get turned off by something a man does, right?
Something usually very petty and particular. And there's these accounts, there's a couple of them actually, and they kind of every time they see a woman saying, oh, yeah, and this really gives me the ick, or gives me the ick about my boyfriend or husband or whatever, they open up their notes app on their iPhone and they add it to the list. And there's always like this heinously long list. And the one that I saw recently was when I see my husband walking on a pebblestone beach in Europe, and then he's kind of like, it's got a video of like the husband, like obviously not like walking naturally, that he's kind of like, you know, his feet are sore because he's having to walk across these like little pebbles, right? And there's just a range of those like little petty things that are apparently icks or really turn-offs for women.
So, and this is like what's the social commentary angle on this? It's like women are too fussy, or is it that like men need to do better? What's the angle?
It's like food for the incels, because they see this as just like, oh, women are being so picky, or there are just so many rules to be an attractive partner, a potentially attractive like mate, that it's impossible with Western women. And I might as well become a passport bro and like leave the world of Western women behind and go to someone with less standards in, you know, Asia or something.
I mean, it kind of is true though, right? Like if we think about this. So I think both men and women can be picky in their own way, but at the same time, like I think a man is much more likely to settle for what he can get, as opposed to like searching for the optimal, like, whereas I think women are optimizers as opposed to satisficers, right? So I think it is true in that sense, in relative terms. And certainly I think if, you know, women are not like, yeah, keep just rejecting partners off the back of little things like the way they walk on pebbles, then
I mean, I must admit, it's not very manly. Like, you don't, if you know that legendary scene where Daniel Craig as James Bond comes out of like the surf and he's like tanked and he's, you know, he just like the water's running off him, he's got the abs. If he then had to proceed like to walk across a pebblestone beach and like, it would take some of the masculine magic out of that scene. So, you know, fair enough.
I think though, like the pursuit of perfection is like it actually, like this is probably like a Tinder thing, don't you think? Or those kind of dating apps where it just commodifies partners or prospective partners in the sense that you can, you know, swipe left, swipe. I don't even know what the order, which one's which, but swipe away, next, and you just never. You can never. There's always another date.
You think it's a supply and demand thing? Always thinking like an economist.
No, I don't even think it's a supply and demand thing, because there actually is an optimal number of partners mathematically that you should date before settling, such that you know, like the likelihood that you're of a higher probability to find the optimal partner for you. There's actually a formula, but so actually, I think this is actually like irrational for this keep swiping approach, right? It's the part of the brain that is never satisfied, that always wants the next thing, that wants to see what's like. It's the poker machine effect, right?
I do think there's a pet peeve thing though, right? If we put Tinder and dating apps to the side for a moment, I do think that it's totally, you know, normal and you see it in your everyday life that people have pet peeves, like they just really bother you in an inordinate amount, right? Like, you know, I'll dob myself in, right? Like, have you ever blown your nose in the shower?
I don't. I don't tend to. No, no. I don't think. I mean, I may have, but like, I don't make a regular habit of it.
No, well, I mean, it's not like a pastime.
Well, Roger, do you piss in the shower? That's probably the more relevant question.
Do I piss in the shower?
Yeah.
I mean, does anyone not?
I'm pretty sure there's some people out there who are disgusted at the thought.
I get it, right? And like, there's pissing in the shower and there's pissing in the shower. I think
Just
when
don't take a shit in the shower. That's too far.
like Joey Diaz. I think that when women imagine men pissing in the shower, they just like imagine men just totally dousing, like, you know, dousing like the thing like a urinal.
Just don't piss on the shampoo bottles, okay?
Yeah, just like, you know, like having fun spraying it all over the doors and the wall. No, I mean, just like aim it.
Do
in the
you
drain
think I
straight
can get it
down.
over the shower screen and into the bathtub?
I'm not a young man anymore. But like, I think that anyway, like that's a good example, right? For every woman that wouldn't care at all about their partner, you know, just maybe pissing in the shower occasionally or whatever it is down the drain. Let's not say in the shower, just like down the drain. There would be women
Targeted,
there that,
aimed.
yeah, of course, not an animal. There'd be women out there that would just be like, no, that is, you know, that's a offense worth terminating this relationship for.
But you know, those same women would piss in the shower themselves.
Well, the problem with women pissing in the shower is that you know, you don't have the level of control and aim for the drain. So, if anything, I think where do we go wrong with this conversation?
Just don't use those you know, those little scrunchy body wash, you know, scrub things.
The loofahs.
Yeah, because you know, there could be some residual moisture retained.
I mean, I'm all for petty. Like, I actually think pettiness can often be very funny and very comical. So actually, like, I do like it, and I think often it is used in a comedic way. But if it really is a problem, like if men do feel like they're you know, they're being targeted, or I don't know. I think it plays into kind of fears for men sometimes. But I think that most of the things I've seen have been like, you know, quite comical.
I think, you know, one of the with this conversation, again, I think both men and women have their icks, right? All the things that turn them off or whatever, discouraged by. It's just that I think for men, the barrier of an ick is not sufficiently high to stop them sleeping with a woman, right? Whereas it is for a woman.
Yeah, and look, like, often these things are about they're already in relationships too, right? It's you know, so it's obviously not that much of an ick that it's causing massive issues.
But it can be like a barrier to I was dating this guy, but then he, you know, he used his fork in his right hand instead of his left hand or whatever. If that's vice versa, I can't.
Do you piss in the shower?
A lady never tells.
That's definitely a yes. Have you ever peed in a pool though?
Oh, I would have as a kid.
No, not as a kid.
Not as an adult, no. Who pisses in the pool?
Yeah, I'm just asking. Well, but okay.
As
What
a
about the
proud
ocean?
pool owner, I tell you what, you don't piss in the pool.
I haven't pissed in your pool.
I hope not.
What about the ocean though?
I think ocean is passable. I think it's a bit creepy if you do it in the vicinity of other people, though.
Because I think ocean's okay, personally. But yeah, obviously, like between the flags and everything. But I don't know.
Between the flags.
Can you imagine though if you were in one of those public pools where they have that like that dye that they put in to identify urine?
Well, it could be, in the beach. No good. So, Roger, what are we talking about today?
Well, we've had to go talking about office culture before. We are both lifetime white-collar workers. So today I thought we'd give a rundown on some of the common office stereotypes. You know, have a little laugh with it, have a little chat about it, you know, what kind of creatures you see in the wild.
Okay, sounds good. So I think we're going to give one each and then discuss it and then swap over. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. The graduate. Fresh out of university, the graduate arrives with confidence, believing they've got everything figured out. Armed with academic achievements and praise from teachers and professors, they expect the workplace to mirror the same admiration. However, reality hits differently as they realize the professional world values experience and practical know-how far more than grades. Key features. Known for dropping academic jargon in meetings that nobody asked for. struggles to understand why others aren't impressed by their GPA, and slowly learns that humility and learning from others are essential career tools.
The graduate. I actually have vivid memories of the graduate recruitment process really well. And I still have a lot of fond memories of my time there, so I'm torn on this one. Like, I think there are a lot of good things about them. You have to remember they're just very young, right? They're still maturing. They're going through a life stage where they're still finding out a lot about themselves, about the real world. So a lot of these things are just being office virgins, or essentially going from that responsibility or the mindset of a student to an actual employee, where obviously as you mature, you realize that there are clear differences. But at the end of the day, these are very clever individuals, and I don't like the fact that people try to take that away from them, which I think you do see a lot of people trying to diminish the graduate and just saying that, that no matter how smart they are, that they just lack the skills to apply their intelligence in any meaningful way. And I think that sometimes speaks to people's insecurities as well. But I don't know. What's your initial reaction? Where's your mind at?
I think we got to this is true of a certain kind of graduate, right? So a lot of graduates come in quite open-minded and willing to learn and in fact humble and respect the organization they've joined and that they're going to learn from their peers and so on. But there is just a certain kind of graduate, maybe it's just a portion of the graduate cohort, and it's a kind of person who their whole life has been told how wonderful they are. So, they did well at school, they maybe topped their class at school, and their teachers told them how amazing they were. Then they went to university and they got more of the same. They excelled at university, they got great marks at university. Again, they're destined for greatness or whatever. No one ever has they've never in their life experienced criticism or any kind of negative feedback. They've never hit a brick wall. And then the first time they hit a brick wall is in the workplace, because being a graduate, you've been at university, but that teaches you a certain suite of things, in the academic space, but that doesn't teach you anything about how to work with other people or just generally how to navigate a workplace, right? And the personalities within a workplace. So it's very often the case, I think, that these younger people, and again, it's just a certain cohort, not every graduate, they come in and they struggle to receive feedback on their work that's maybe a bit critical, or even just to relate to other people who aren't like them, or maybe they even think that they're better than everyone else, right? That's their starting point. And they don't appreciate what they can learn from other people. So they don't appreciate that actually the 40-year-old who's been in the workforce for 15 or more years might know a thing or two more than them, just because they maybe didn't have as good a grade at university or at high school or whatever as them. So I think that's not every graduate. And I think as a whole, I think graduates are really valuable to organizations. So a good graduate, almost by definition, is the future of an organization, right? These are the people who are going to, advance in their career and be the future leaders of the organization. But it's just a certain cohort that haven't got the memo that they're at the bottom of the rung. They still think that they're at the top.
I think there's a bit of a culture shock too around what it takes to be an effective or a good employee in an organization, because there's always a clash between the older generation of workers that might have been in a company for a long time, and they don't really have that formal education or had the competition to get in there. And I think they always have that chip on their shoulder in a way, where they kind of understand that they feel exposed because they don't have that qualification, tertiary qualification in some cases, or whatever it may be, but they can do the job effectively. And they don't like this idea that the world has changed in that way, because it puts pressure back on them and makes them self-conscious about their formal education, right? And so they project that on in other ways to say that the education is meaningless. And the other thing I noticed, there's definitely this view of putting the younger generation through their paces, right? This idea of earning your stripes. And I just don't think that the younger generation has that same mentality, right? They don't feel any obligation of having to mindlessly chip away at the rock before they're given opportunities, or given the opportunity to do a job, right? They don't have this same hierarchy in their mind, their mental map of what an organization should be. And to that point where they don't seem to respect any kind of hierarchy, they have this idea that, you know, shouldn't the best people or the most talented people be celebrated and given more opportunities over, you know, other people, perhaps? Look, it's an interesting question, but going back to it, I do see quite a lot of diminishing of the talent of graduates, you know, and I don't love that. At the same time, you know, it's clearly they don't do themselves any favors with how they behave, right? But some of that's just being immature.
I don't necessarily think it's like diminishing of their talent, because like good graduates are like in high demand. Like like the fact that you're part of a certain graduate program, it's like a mark on your CV, and then people look at that and go, "Oh, okay, this person's been through that graduate program and they've succeeded and they've made it."
I'm talking about other people in the organization.
Yeah, but I think that's they're respected too, like among others in the organization, like as being like, yeah, these are the young go-getters or whatever. But like at the same time, I think any graduate program, part of it is at least survival of the fittest. Like, you know, like it should be a little bit like that. It should, like a graduate program from like a workforce planning perspective should factor in that only about half of graduates that come into an organization in that first year are going to still be with that organization in whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after. Like it should factor in that some either aren't going to cut it or are not going to be a good culture fit, and we'll move on, self-select elsewhere, right? So I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
And the keepers are the ones left are the keepers, or perhaps the ones who can't get better jobs elsewhere, but depending on the organization.
Okay. I'm going to go with a bit of a different character that you often see. And to me, for every kind of team or company that I've operated in, I can always tell this kind of person, and I almost respect it a little bit, but not enough to get on board. And it's the fake busy person. And I think this person is a master of appearing swamped with work, despite contributing very little. They're always typing furiously or verbalizing their work, but no one's ever really seen what they're working on. They have key features such as constantly exclaiming that they're under the pump. They've had to stay late, or they're taking work home with them. They often are very quick to reply in DMs and team messages around their workload and things like that. And they're known for having like, you know, windows open or kind of engagement about half finished work. And I see these kind of people around the place. And it is hard to like, I mean, sometimes there are genuine elements to this, but I do think they get into a bit of a identity around a martyr for work. You know, they martyr themselves over their workload.
I think the counterpoint to this personality is someone who gets stuff done, but that's like seen as lazy. Like, so they appear like, so the 180 degrees opposite of this person, yeah, is the person who just seems to do nothing, but yet they actually do deliver. Like they do deliver.
Quiet achiever.
Like a lot of, yeah. Well, it's not even that they're a quiet achiever, but it's just more that like they might be like doing crossword puzzles like all day, or taking like really long lunch breaks, or the last in to arrive and first to leave kind of thing. But yet they still get shit done, right? And I think this is a classic sort of trope of Japanese work culture, where you get that whole presentee sort of, working really long hours. It's like a
performative busyness.
Yeah, and I think it does go to show just like competence, like how important competence is. Like, and I think the problem with a busy person in how you've outlined it, it's not actually that they're so dedicated to their work that they're busy. It's actually that they're not very good and they can't actually do things efficiently, such that or they are so unfocused that they're erratic and they're doing so many different things, or they're biting off more than they can chew, or they're not organizing themselves or managing themselves very well, as opposed to them actually genuinely being a martyr for their work. And I think that's kind of the reality.
I think that this type of character used to be a lot more popular, like maybe 8 to 10 years ago. Like when I first started my career, I think that the fake busy personality tended to work quite well with management. because they saw that as someone who had good work ethic, right? And I think that it was before all this positivity around work culture began. So it was okay to be a bit negative around how busy you were and how negative, like it wasn't like a work-life balance thing that needed to be celebrated. Now the script has flipped a lot, right, around work-life balance and all these, being outcome driven, right? And it's not necessarily a good thing. It's a bad thing if you're staying late or you're constantly negative about your work activities or goals, right? So I think this one is slowly changing a little bit around this stuff because management doesn't respond that well nowadays to this overworked kind of busy martyr. And I do think a lot of people tend to get quite fatigued by these characters, right? Because it's, like I said, it's always a negative view of their work, so hopefully this one's sweating itself out.
I just think that more generally, if you are a manager or like the leader or, let's say this person reports to you, they don't help you. Like them being busy doesn't help you.
Though.
It doesn't. It doesn't, because what matters is, are they getting the job done? That's what actually matters for you. Whereas this is just a veneer, a perception of like, so maybe like if there's like a slight variant on this where they're busy and they get the job done, then yes, okay, that's true, right? But I guess maybe I'm misinterpreting it, and we've talked before about, you've talked before about the lazy but really competent worker, like the highly skilled person who is lazy but they get shit done, right? And there's a reason they still have a job, because they get shit done, right? And they are in value. In fact, it's the luxury of being able to kick goals that lets you be
These
lazy,
people, though,
right?
companies have a very, very hard time getting rid or weeding out a fake busy person, because there are certain benefits, because appearances do count for a lot. As much as we claim to be outcome driven, perceptions do account for a lot, right? And this idea of if your employee is always busy, then you never have to manage them. They kind of always are doing their work. Usually these kind of people are not really they're using their busyness as a smoke screen to like, leave me alone, right? I'm too busy to absorb any more work, and I'm too busy to deal with any kind of communication you want from me. So I think it's like why it's been so successful in the past and why you still see this is because they're almost self-governing. They're very low touch from a manager's perspective. And if they're not in a really crucial role or in a role that kind of just ticks along, I can see why they've survived in the wilderness of the corporate hierarchy.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on the nature of it, like where if they're depended upon by management to achieve certain things and they're not achieving it, it doesn't matter whether you appear busy or not. You're not going to add value. Your value is not going to be recognized, no matter how busy you perceive yourself to be or how fake busy you are. Like, I think people can see through that. But if you're like several steps removed from that the manager of that person doesn't really know what they're doing, doesn't really know what their contribution is. Like maybe it probably depends on the organization. Like if they're, I don't know, if they're in a customer service role and the management are sort of far removed from customer service, then perhaps that person can get away with it off the veneer that they're busy, right? But I think where they've got to get work done, results kind of matter.
All right, give it to me. What do you have?
The Office nostalgic. Clinging to memories of the good old days, The Office nostalgic takes every opportunity to remind colleagues how things were tougher and better back in the day. They love recounting stories about 18% interest rates in the 90s whenever younger employees mention housing struggles, hoping to position themselves as the wise office elder. However, their sense of pride is often misplaced, as most colleagues politely nod along while quietly avoiding them. Beneath the surface, they grapple with frustration and an identity tied almost entirely to work. Key features frequently begin sentences with, "back in my day," brings up outdated workplace practices no one misses, and struggles to connect with younger co-workers feeling increasingly isolated.
Ooh. Okay, let me ask you something. So if you see someone who's worked for a particular organization for more than, where's your limit where it actually changes starts to tick over and change your opinion about the person based on how their tenure, how long they've been at a company. Because I kind of think that this stereotype often is a long tenure-based person, right? You can be nostalgic about the work culture, I suppose, but usually it's being nostalgic about a time in the company. So that necessitates like long tenure. So is it, would you blink at someone who'd been in a company for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years?
I think it feeds into your notion of like who that person is. I think there's two parts to it. One is tenure, the other is age. So I think once you reach a certain age, especially if you see yourself at that age as like, you've been around the traps, like the ins and outs of everything, and like you've seen it all before. These are these young whippersnappers making the same mistakes that I've seen made hundreds of times before, and yet I'm here and no one respects me. Like no one's listening to me, no one asks me what I think and my opinion, and they struggle with that. That's like, so I think partially that's tenure based, but I think also there's an age thing. It's like they are afforded a lot of respect, maybe in other domains. So they might be a parent, or they might perceive themselves as like experienced. Like I know like how the world works, right? Like these young people, I need to teach these young people a thing or two, but except the younger people don't want to be taught, and maybe like this is almost like the reverse of the graduate in some ways, in the sense that this person, for them, it's like they lose face in the workplace. Like it's a loss of face that they're not afforded the respect that they think they deserve, right? So I think part of that's tenure, but I think age is the other component.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I think it's seen as a generally negative thing by most people when the tenure moves over, let's just say 15 years. I'll use that as a bit of a benchmark. I think that from 15 years onwards.
Wait, how many years did you work at?
Around 15. Yeah.
You're going to move on, son.
But I think that's where the intersection you're talking about, where it's age and tenure. I was, a relatively young person, and I had a complicated thing of kind of split in that particular company anyway. So I do think though it does change your view on them, right? Around their ability, their flexibility. You start to kind of almost think that they have a certain kind of rigid thinking or whatever it may be. And that then flows on to other areas around how they're perceived, how they can kind of adapt to change in the workforce. Now, nostalgia, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think that work culture, and especially how it's celebrated around, disruption, this idea of like celebrating disruption, is not necessarily like without its kind of cons, right? And we're very quick to reinvent things without thinking about what we lost, right? The classic kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like I do think that when you have a long enough career, you do see things as like at the cyclic nature of things, whether slowly things get decentralized when they become too bloated in a central function, and then over time ticks over and they go, oh man, all these decentralized satellites doing the same thing, it's just out of control, nothing standardized. What we really need is a center of excellence. And they slowly kind of get pulled back to the center again as one standardized big monolith. And then they're like, oh, this thing it's too slow to adapt, it's not agile enough. And then it goes in and out and in and out, and the consultants sell their packs in and out, in and out. So I think if you're someone who is sitting on the sidelines and has seen it all, and perhaps you were a willing participant in some parts of it, how can you not be jaded, right? Like, how can you not be nostalgic for what worked when you've seen the cycle, right? And I think that's the thing that people sometimes don't realize. And when you get these consultants or these organizational transformation programs that preach to these people that have been there for a long time, saying this is going to this is the future, this is the new way of working, and it's like it's like that Dave Mustaine song, if there's a new way, I'll be the first in line, but it better work this time, right? And like it's kind of that jaded experience factor.
Yeah, I mean, experience counts for something. I think maybe the difference here of this caricature and experienced plus competency tends to mean they progress and they become leaders, and They are the senior executives of the organization. Whereas the fact that they're kind of still battling away with graduates who don't respect them kind of means something's gone awry. Like there's some other attribute of them which has held them back, and I think they can struggle to deal with that, like because they haven't quite come to terms. Maybe they have reached their limits. They have reached a point of like, no, this is the end of the line for you. Like this is as good as it gets for your career. And I think they can struggle with coming to terms with that.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
All right, next up, Roger.
All right, I'm going to go with a classic here, and I'm going to call this one the Gossip Girl. All right, so in every workplace there is a kind of center of gossip or kind of connection to the grapevine that takes the form of just knowing or where all the juice is, like understanding. And this crosses the boundaries of actual work-related gossip. So like knowing what's happening with the organization, when changes are coming, and, there's like very valuable, power and knowledge in that. But then it also translates to personal things, like who is, caught doing something wrong or made a fool of themselves over drinks, or like there's a lot of there's this gossip networks that start to develop over these organizations and workplaces. And they're very, very powerful. And often like you do find that if you're tapped into those networks, those people in the know, it can be incredibly valuable to helping you get things done within an organization, or staying on the front foot of things, or being accepted into a certain group. And so it's a very interesting character when you find, you're close to power in that way, right? Like when a gossip girl befriends you or kind of trusts you to kind of share some of this information, and you can kind of come to them and get that. And yeah, so it's an interesting but powerful, and sometimes these kind of characters take the place of team and executive assistants. Traditionally, like there's definitely been like a network of assistants that have the gossip, but it doesn't have to be just that. It can be just people who are very good at this, or particularly enjoy it within an organization and poise themselves to do that.
How much do you think this is it like knowledge is power, right? That's the old adage, right? So I would say there's probably like some of it's low value, some of it's more social gossip. Like it's, this person did this, and
not as low value as you think, though.
Well, okay, but like higher value gossip would be things like this person asked for a pay rise and they got rejected. Like, in the sense that like it helps you navigate the organization better. So they might actually play a useful role for an organization as almost as like in the same way as, like leaking something to a journalist, right? But completely different in origin of causality, but like in terms of their effect, like they help others understand things that can't be written, sort of thing. So yeah, but there definitely is like a certain kind of person, right? And they tend to be, and I don't know if you've noticed, there's like a certain currency to like gossip. It's like, and the people get this role. They come to kind of assume that role because they know so much about other things that are happening that people come to them to hear what's going on, and they know that like their ticket to tap into that information that person know is to offer information. So they're like an exchange, an information exchange.
It's like the Game of Thrones, like my little birdies, my little swallows everywhere, right? Like the eunuch has all these spies all over the kingdom.
Yeah, that's all, and that's what it is, right? It's the I'll tell you something, but you have to tell me something. In fact, you probably have to tell me twice as much as I'm going to reveal to you. But hey, if we've got a good like exchange thing going on.
And knowledge is power, right? Like I think that gossip gets a bad name. There is a reason we are predispositioned to get excited about gossip, right? And I think anyone who doesn't admit that is kind of lying to themselves a little bit. People are like people might have, like they might be split on genders or different personality traits, but at the end of the day, there's a reason that gossip sells. And it's because we understand, we're social creatures, that we are tracking our place in the hierarchy, and knowing this information, like being the last to know something has dire consequences when it's the right piece of information, right? So, it's I think it's an important role, and it's one that's formed organically time and time again in any kind of social group, and workplaces are no different.
Have you found a difference in, like, throughout your career, the nature of gossip as you've been, like, from junior to more senior?
Oh yeah. I actually think that when you're more junior, the gossip, like you're not privy to the good organizational gossip, right? Like it's very, like, if I'm thinking the bottom rung, like say the graduates or whatever, like that's all just social gossip around, who was behaving badly, who, embarrassing things or slightly like, controversial things that happened. But it's when you get into the more senior levels of an organization that you start to be exposed to some of the gossip that's like, oh, okay, this is actually quite powerful information that could change the course of someone's career or change the course of a certain initiative, right? Like, and I think that, like you only have to look at a lot of the finance sector and a lot of the Me Too movements that have happened within Australia in the last 5 years, that a lot of these things started as gossip and how it was all going to be dealt with, right? Like bad behavior, sexual harassment, kind of fraud, all this kind of stuff that's happening. That all starts as gossip and in some ways ends as gossip. Like a lot of, when you look at a lot of the fraud cases and things like that, and they all start as rumors, and some of them turn out to be true.
Yeah. All right. Next up, the rule enforcer. For the rule enforcer, policies and procedures are sacred texts, and any deviation from them is an unforgivable offence. They see it as their personal mission to ensure everything is done by the book, much to the frustration of colleagues trying to cut through red tape. They struggle to comprehend why anyone would adopt a get it done first, apologise later attitude, viewing such behaviour as reckless. While their intentions are good, their rigidity often creates more bottlenecks than solutions. Key features. The first to say, actually, that's not the proper process, feels personally offended when others bend or ignore rules, creates tension in meetings by raising minor issues that others dismiss.
I'm just trying to rack my brain around this particular stereotype, and I wonder whether they are of a bygone era or I just have not been viewing this character in workplaces anymore.
Well, you did work for an organisation subject to a royal commission, didn't you?
That could be anyone in my industry. So, look, I think that I definitely don't see this character as much anymore in the kind of two-dimensional way that it's been characterized, because I think that more than anything outside of maybe potentially like a risk and regulatory environment, these people just like aren't popular, right? They're too hard to work with, and I think that I don't see much of it. I don't see much of it because, again, the style of modern work and modern management is one of disruption, is of innovation. It's of the worst thing you can do in an organization is have a mentality, well, what they say is the worst thing, of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or we've always done it this way, right? Like those are the two most like, oh, you just are a dinosaur, like you're not fit for this company. It's like there's this driving forward, there's this kind of momentum, this inertia of like, of trying to rebuild and innovate. And so again, we talked about like styles. I think that this particular character or style is definitely like pushed against modern sensibilities in the white collar world.
So there's a fantastic book called The Geek Way, and it kind of grapples with how organizations become really bureaucratic or can become bureaucratic as they become bigger. And usually like people associate bureaucracy with, say, government, but it can happen to any like large organization. And usually what happens is that they become so big that you have dedicated people whose job it is to enforce rules. And their job is to act as like a gatekeeper because, some risk mitigation was put in place to stop some, outcome from happening. And so they've employed some team to vet all activity across the whole organization that relates to whatever that thing is. And then they have to sign off on something. And then their whole job is just to ensure processes and rules are followed. And these kind of people can never see the bigger picture because they've got no skin in the game for the bigger picture. They don't have any upside risk. It's all downside risk for them because if something fucks up, it's them not following their procedure, and it's on them for not doing it the right way. Whereas if you take like a bit of a more, complete view, you would say, well, sometimes you need to take risks to get reward, and sometimes you need to plow through rules, and whether it's internal, I mean, certainly legal requirements are perhaps different, but maybe internal procedures and processes and rules or whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of that, like, I think there has to be flexibility. There has to be, you bend the rules to get outcomes where sensible. Like, and I think this kind of person doesn't get that because they're not trained to get it, or they're not conditioned to get it, and they have no benefits from
to kind of, we've painted this person in a pretty poor light, and I think that the good part of this,
well, so we should,
but the good part is when this intersects with discipline, right? Like, I think that we're often thinking about, don't break the rules, but there is a type of person that's adjacent to this character who doesn't want to break the process, right? And there's a bit of a kind of distinction there in my mind, that actually really good operators don't deviate from like a really good design process, for example. They may scale things or whatever it is, but they make sure that they have the attention to detail to push themselves through the system that they've designed for themselves, right? And I think that that part should be celebrated. Like, when you meet someone like that, who can actually like hold themselves to the discipline it takes to actually, stick to their system, their designs, whatever it is, their principles, that's you need those people.
Yeah, I think there's people who have tools and methodologies and frameworks that they use to get good outcomes. I don't think fit into this category. So, like, one of the examples from Andrew McAfee and the Geek Way is like Amazon, where I think some junior burger from Amazon looked at their website and some functionality or some aspect of the website wasn't working properly, or they identified like an improvement that could be made. And, a company as big as Amazon, maybe the instincts are that, there must be like a dedicated, review committee that meets quarterly to, examine like proposals to change the website. And it's like this big convoluted process. But the example is that for Amazon, no, if you see a problem, you fix it and you just do it. You don't have to clear it with like 25 different people. And there's another amazing reference in that book, the 1944 Simple Sabotage Field Manual that the CIA rolled out during World War II, or the precursor to the CIA, to like take down institutions in during World War II. And like, it just commences with like a roll call of like what most large modern organizations, when they get us to a certain size, like roll out like almost as a default. So things like, so I'll read out the list: insist on doing everything through channels, never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. 2, make speeches, talk as frequently as possible and at great length, illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences. Never hesitate to make...
sounds like our podcast.
Yeah, never hesitate to make a few appropriate patriotic comments. 3, when possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Attempt to make the committees as large as possible, never less than 5. 4, bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. 5, haggle over precise wordings of communications minutes and resolutions. 6, refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting and attempt to reopen the question of the advisability of that decision. 7, advocate caution. Be reasonable and urge your fellow conferees to be reasonable and avoid haste, which might result in embarrassments or difficulties later on. 8, be worried about the propriety of any decision. Raise the question of whether such action is contemplated, whether such action lies within the jurisdiction of the group, or whether it might conflict with the policy of some higher echelon. So it's like, like this is the sabotage manual of the CIA, but like this is like classic, like, modern management practice in many large organizations.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, man. I'm gonna throw out one there that I think is that may be a bit triggering to some people, and I don't mean it to be. I'm just using it to kind of illustrate a greater family of people or characters. And I'm going to call this one the government enterprise agreement specialist, right? And this is an employee who sees their work as a strict exchange of labor for wages, and that they have certain entitlements that need to be met at a micro level, and everything in terms of what you ask for them is a negotiation on said entitlements. They're very quick to pull HR rank if they feel they are backed into a situation that they are uncomfortable with, that is asking them to go above and beyond in any way, regardless of the time frame or the context.
I like this one. Yeah, this is not good career advice to be this person, right? Like this person doesn't quite understand like the compact that, you know, a good healthy relationship with your employer like should be, like what it actually is, right? Of course, we all work on legal agreements, legal contracts that underpin what we owe to one another. But it's actually a bad outcome if we think about our contract as the guiding document or the guiding principles underpinning our relationship. Like, because at the end of the day, like the world is more complicated than a contract. Like the world, like the actual things you need to do and that are expected of you, the quid pro quo are more complex than what can be communicated in a contract. And the other thing is that it goes both ways, right? So this isn't just about employees giving their employers, you know, just get the job done, like pull your finger out and like do a long day's work to get all the projects completed on time or whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's what you should do. It also goes the other way, because if you're like that, your employer will be like that in return, and they'll do good things for you. They'll promote you, they'll give you good opportunities, they'll trust you for projects that you might not otherwise get the chance to do. And there's always give and take with all of this stuff. And if you're an employee and you conceive of yourself as a gun for hire, that's a very transactional view, and it's not going to serve you well in your career. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I picked out the government side because I think there's probably a higher concentration on that side. But I've seen plenty of this in private industry, right?
I think this is. I don't think this is unique to government at all. I think this happens everywhere.
It
this is,
and I'm calling that out. So
yeah,
I think it's I understand the impulse, and there are some contexts where you do need to hold corporations to account. You know, that classic thing around like, I get a break. You know, I legally should have a break for lunch or whatever it is, right? But I do think that what I find is the people who settle into this mentality and form this as a bit of an identity tend to kind of dig themselves in a bit of a trench that they're very comfortable with. You know, they're kind of, it's almost like when you meet those people who are almost like they have this obscene kind of view of like daring the organization to try to deal with them. You know, like I feel like those people who are like, oh, you know, if they ask me to do this, I wish they would, because I'll take them to HR, or you know, they can't get rid of me because they'll have to pay me out or whatever. It'll be wrongful dismissal, and I think that these people do exist within different types of organizations in varying degrees, and they become very toxic to the culture in a lot of ways, right? Like I'm describing the more extreme end of this behavior, but you know, I've pushed against that a lot, right? And I think that the hard thing nowadays is the blurring of responsibilities because of things like remote working, because of things like all the collaboration and online tools that make it a bit, you know, this idea of offering flexibility. What flexibility means is flexibility on both sides. And I think that makes it harder and harder to try to kind of fit your day in a visible and observable 9 to 5 for you to kind of form an argument around how much time you need to be compensated for, whether it's time in lieu or overtime or whatever it might be. You know, so I think that the modern landscape and the way that we're working now makes this incredibly hard to manage an employee like this. Very, very hard. And yeah, I think that unfortunately they're also very, very hard to remove or remediate once they're inside an organization. Almost impossible.
I think we've discussed sort of in other questions today around like the notion of if you can do your job and you can do it well, like no one's going to be on your back about anything. Like the fact that you're getting your job done and you can be relied upon means that no one's going to take issue if you're like at the shops at 3:00 on a work day, on your work from home day. Like your employer is probably not going to care in the sense that, well, I don't need to know what's going on, right? Except like this person has no performance issues. But the moment you have any semblance of performance issues, or you've said, oh no, I can't do that thing that you've asked me to do, or that's not in my role description, or actually I think I need to be paid more for that, or you need to compensate me for that. That's the moment that you're going to trigger. Like the moment you're...
Yes, it's the reciprocity that you were talking to, right?
When you're caught out at the shops at 3 p.m. on a workday, that's going to be seized upon, right? So I think that's the quid pro quo that we're talking.
All right.
Last one for me. Last two, is it? One from me, one from you. All right. The planner. The planner is convinced that nothing worthwhile can happen without a detailed, structured plan. Trial and error is an alien concept to them, and they make it their mission to ask everyone, where's your plan? They thrive in endless planning sessions, crafting elaborate diagrams and plans on a page, believing these are the true markers of success. While their calendars are filled with meetings, their actual contributions are thin, as they rely on others to execute the work and claim partial credit for results they had little to do with. Key features: loves meetings and presentations more than actual tasks, constantly asks for updates on project plans but never delivers tangible work, believes strategy is more valuable than execution despite producing minimal output.
You're describing a project manager. Like that whole class, a whole role of people inside a delivery organization. Look, what I see nowadays is that actually, like, you've described a planning type personality who they have like a real attention to detail, and on its most kind of egregious end, they don't even care what's being delivered. They're just trying to like keep the sludge moving through the pipe at a reasonable velocity, right? And they don't really care what comes out the other side, but their job is to kind of move it through. But I actually think that what I see more is like less of that attention to detail nowadays and more of the superficial kind of idea of planning. And that's the part that I find horrendous, because at least the planners take mental load off people by having, tracking the things and breaking things down in a reasonable way. Like I feel that skill is slipping a little bit from the kind of project management planning side, that they're actually much more hands-off than the project managers from years gone by. But look, if you are in a big, complex organization, you will need quite a lot of planning. Like there's no getting around it, really. Like I think that you do need a dedicated focus on high-value planning activities, and I will stand up for that a little bit. If you do it right, it doesn't have to be moving sludge through a pipe. You can still be focused on outcomes. You can hold people to account, because a lot of things go wrong and a lot of misery is experienced when people don't do things that they say they will do. All right, so there is a role, especially in like a very complex, large-scale project, for this kind of stuff. So that's all I'll say. Now, if someone is like needlessly planning like normal business as usual operational day-to-day stuff, yeah, that's not cool.
Yeah, I mean, I actually can't stand this stereotype, this person, right? Because I do think that, yes, you're right, for like complex projects. So like if you're delivering like an Olympic Games, like, and you've got to deliver that on schedule, and you've got, everything from venues, construction, procurement, like, okay.
You're not over-planning the Olympics, so to speak.
Like you have to have a plan, like, so yeah, I'm probably, this is less targeted at the, good solid project planners who can map out all the interface risks and all that sort of stuff, but more the people whose default in the workplace, their comfort zone is planning, because they actually don't possess any actual competencies or skills themselves to actually do any work themselves. So this is the kind of the person who wants to get other people to do work in the way that they kind of want to be the architect of, but they don't actually possess the skills or attributes to do the work themselves. So people who, and it can be like the less complex projects. It can be even projects that like a person can just do it themselves, right? Like, and yet, like it just needs to be done. It just needs a person to do the task. But then you have this planner who believes that, no, actually, like the fact that you haven't planned out what you're doing means that you haven't done it very thoughtfully. And in some ways there's a tension of like the art and the science here, because, and I say this as someone who's very, I love to roll the sleeves up and get my hands dirty and actually get stuff done myself. Like I love that, like part of the job, right? In my own sort of workplace. So I really can't stand these planning types because they're usually people who don't actually possess, like they can't do that. They don't know the job that they're planning for. And when they come in and they want to kind of come over the top of you, that's very frustrating. And it's almost laughable because this person doesn't possess, they have no right, they have no place to be coming in and interfering with like your own natural trajectory towards delivering a good product. But yet they want to take credit for the great product after it's being complete. So I think that's the tension. And I guess the other part of this is this, it's sort of the antithesis of emergent order, and the fact that a lot of the greatest things that exist just emerged organically. They weren't actually planned. And so this person doesn't understand that. And they don't have a respect for the fact that sometimes you just need to try things and see what sticks and what doesn't. And that's your learning and feedback process. And you drop the things that don't work and you continue with the things that do work. And that sometimes there isn't this grand designer or architect behind the scenes that gets the greatest things. That sometimes you actually have to try and fail. And I think that's the bit that this person has a real chilling effect on, because they can stop people from trying things.
All right, Andy, I think this is a good segue into something off the back of that, the planner. And I'm going to call this one the smartest guy in the room, right? And this is a really interesting one. And I'm willing to admit, early on in my career, I was actually given this feedback from my manager that he used the time-honored phrase, just because you're the smartest guy in the room doesn't mean you need to prove it, right? And I was actually really shocked at that at the time, because I definitely didn't think that I was coming across in any kind of arrogant way or anything like that.
Can I just say the framing of that is so geared. Just because you are the smartest guy in the room doesn't mean you need to prove it. It's such a thin end of the wedge way of raising. You're actually not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm going to tell you are, just so this blow is less.
But it's actually quite a good thing to hear early on in your career. We talked about graduates thinking that they're too big for their boots, or they kind of think that they are superior or more intelligent or whatever it is, right? And I think
so. You were one of these graduates.
Well, I definitely didn't. Honestly, Andy, I definitely didn't think I was, and I definitely don't showboat anything. But I guess it doesn't matter at the end of the day, does it? Like it's a lesson in how you're perceived and the effect that you may be having on other people, right? And whether you do it in a nice way or whatever it is, or if you've made someone feel that way, then the crime's kind of done. You know what I mean? Regardless of what you meant or how you think you were perceived, right? So I think it's a good message to hear. And I think this whole thing about the smartest guy in the room, it's often I see it a lot in IT as well. So we talked a little bit about the planner and this idea of not knowing how to do the actual work. I often see, especially in the IT industry, incredibly smart guys, like technically brilliant, to a point where they grapple with things in this, and the kind of difference is like the same way that you and I would struggle to even communicate with a scientist, right, or a physicist. They're actually speaking a different language of technical complexity that's very, very hard for you to partake in. And it's not because you just haven't learnt it. It's actually, no, your brain actually couldn't learn it. and that is the reality about some of this stuff. So what happens traditionally when you are someone like that is that you have incredible intelligence and technical prowess, but often your brilliance is not seen and it's not celebrated. And so that kind of gives you that classic chip on your shoulder kind of disdain for non-technical people, because it's a version of what you articulated. If you are someone who has deep IT technical knowledge, you feel that any business person doesn't add value. You know, they get by on a combination of like grit and charm and don't actually build anything, right? It's like the tension between devs or engineers and business reps, right? Or account managers. And I do think that there is something here that like, you know, that this idea of how much should intelligence, technical ability, whatever it is, be celebrated within an organization, and the kind of commanding that they reserve is often the case that leadership is not a technical pursuit. The positions of most organizational change and power and gravity are non-technical roles. So it's quite an interesting kind of dynamic. Keen on your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you were saying before around like the impression you're leaving people, like, and it just goes to like how subtle all of these things are, like, because I mean, you can get the perception of being the smartest guy in the room because you are genuinely the smartest guy in the room, and then everything gets seen through that lens. But I think often it's actually not necessarily the perception, not necessarily like a genuine belief that that person is the smartest guy in the room, but more that the way the person talks, they're quite patronizing, or they speak down to people, or they speak as though the other people don't understand something, or like, I think that's more the charge of it. So it's like they know better, you know, despite the experience or background of people who are actually more experienced or whatever. I mean, I'm just thinking about examples where I've had that before, and it usually is like where, yeah, it's more like the subtler edges of a personality that rubs people up the wrong way, rather than the full substance of a person. So, and I think where genuinely you do have a subject matter expert, or they are the smartest guy in the room, I think the actual smartest people in the room tend to sit back, listen, take everything in, and then at the end they'll like blow everyone away with some synthesis, you know, of the issue that no one, you know, that other people weren't really thinking about, or they'll shape things in other ways. Whereas I think there's a certain kind of outspokenness to the caricature of the smartest guy in the room, you know. And of course, the classic risk, the classic sort of charge against the smartest guy in the room is that not just that they rub people up the wrong way, is that they're actually usually not the smartest person in the room, or at least they're not smart in some dimension. So they're overconfident, like they're too trusting of their instincts, and they don't take on advice. Like I love hearing like what other people have to say about things, because I copy it, you know, like I steal it. Like if I think they're right, if I think they're onto something, or they say a good line that, oh yeah, that like makes sense, then like I steal it, I use it myself. And so I guess this is where I think the smartest people in the room go wrong, if I'm sort of being so humble as to say I'm not one of these people. It's that, but maybe I am, I don't know. It's the lack of desire to embody the views and opinions and experience and advice and expertise of other people.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with all that. I think that the stereotype is definitely not the smartest person in the room, but it also this can also extend to a degree to you know, the good student, you know, that annoying person that always sticks their hand up because they have the answer, right? And how many times do you stick your hand up when no one else is answering? So it's a bit of a social thing, right? Like you need to, and this is why culture is so important within an organization, because if you're someone who pushes the envelope on some of these things, and it can be performance, it could be like seeking out the truth, tearing down kind of redundant processes, whatever it may be, you can only kind of move as fast and as aggressive as the culture can withhold you before it like chews you up and spits you out, right? And it might not be the right place for you. And so I think that what you do find is most people adapt back to that, like that level that the organization, their peers, their colleagues, their manager is comfortable with, right? And it can also, the smartest person in the room can also kind of be a bit of an outworking of that too at times. Not always, but it can be. And I do think that, like, that's why I called out IT, that it would be hard not to have a disdain, like, for the people who do the work. From the people who do the work to the people who would just like take credit, or must be infuriating to see business executives fumble the bag on AI, on enterprise software, or the whole, name it. They've kind of distorted and butchered it. And these people are the ones that are actually building it, right? It's like very rare that you have someone technical up the top. And I think in some ways that's why Elon Musk is so celebrated, because at the end of the day, he's a hands-on engineer, right? But he owns the business and he's at the top.
Yeah, I think that definitely, like, I can imagine in IT, it's like I've got in my mind like the stereotype of some, like very highly educated like someone who would be the most like top of their class but because they're from like India or something like that this person, they're not going to come and be like upper echelon management here in Australia as a IT engineer or something, or whatever they are, right? Just because culturally there's a barrier, but they actually have these hard skills, and back in their home country, they would be like elite workers, right? And then they come here and it's like they are still elite workers. It's just that they don't possess, whether it's the cultural aptitude or whatever, to be the manager ordering people around, right? And so that's where some of the disdain comes from. And I've seen that too. Like, I see that in my field of work where, you'll have someone who's technically brilliant, but maybe they're just not good communicators. Like, because they're so technically brilliant that almost that's a hindrance to their communication, because they can't actually even contemplate what it means not to understand anything that they're talking about. So that, and then that's where you then have this cohort of like almost like interlocutors that can kind of move between both worlds, like the technical people and the like everyone else, right? They kind of understand both worlds enough to, and they're actually also valuable, like those people who but they don't possess the same, like, against that dimension, the same quality of skills.
Look at a figure like Oppenheimer. He played that, right? He played that bridge of hard science to politicians and the political world and governments. And I think that is necessary.
I just one defense though of the smartest people in the room. Like, let's say they are genuinely the smartest people in the room, or even if they're not, maybe the second smartest in the room, but they're still smart. Like, at the end of the day, those are the people who get shit done. And I guess they're almost like a contrast in some ways to the planner sort of mindset, right? Or the person who, who's going to plan everything within the inch of their lives, right? And then claim credit for it. Whereas this person is actually the person who's going to pull their finger out and actually get something done. But I think, you've obviously conceived of this in the context of like a worker bee or something. But I guess the one that, I react to, it's more the personality type. The smartest person in the room, that not necessarily even in a workplace setting, but even in a social setting, like the guy who, like, like the boomer dad who always explains it, or actually, teachers are really bad at this.
Yes,
they're
always lecturing you.
Yeah, like they know they're in this framework of like explaining things, the mansplaining thing, right? Teacher-splaining or cop-splaining. Like, I don't know if you've seen how cops, like, they can get into this mode of like, explaining to people like why they shouldn't, like, as though, like the classic thing, don't stand there on the road, you might get hit by a car, or, as though like, hey, I've been like fucking crossing the road my whole life, I don't need you to tell me like where I shouldn't stand. Like, it's it's that kind of mentality.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
So which one are you out of these ones that we've...
Well, I think I've already admitted my faults early on in my career, but I like to believe that I have definitely addressed that. And to the point where now I do have a personal brand of someone who actually is has a very good, I suppose, EQ or works well with people, right? Like I can work with people of different types, and I think that's something I'm well known for. So I think that I'm proud of actually working on that feedback, but I suppose I've already dogged myself in. What about you?
I'm just going to say I'm David Brent.
No, you don't care if people love you enough to be David Brent. All right.
Get the guitar.